Hi everyone, this is Usman Maqbool. I am starting podcast series. Mainly the topic would be the tech related, engineering related, and the first episode, what I thought is about the batteries since European Union they put ban on sales starting from 2035. So for that, like let's see how feasible it will be and what is the background. So I have Nauman Mubarak today with me. Hi Nauman.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Uh, so for the background, he studied at HKUST and he has many several years of experience in the batteries research, and now he recently moved to Canada. So welcome to my show.
I'm happy to be here.
Okay. Okay, Numan, what inspired you exactly to start research on batteries?
So, to preface my answer, let's say to do any kind of research, you need to have a certain temperament to do research that comes from inquisitiveness, curiosity that generally begins at a very young age. So, it's also the case for me that I've been curious about different topics, generally about science and technology since I was young. Uh, so that is like the nexus from which this project leading to batteries starts. But the fundamental would be that during my master's research, I was working on nanomaterials and specifically on coating materials with self-healing properties. And during this time, I was looking into how coatings could be of more importance to practically related applications, and this is when I came across several excellent publications from a research group at Stanford, led by the amazing Professor Isha. And that inspired me to take a deeper look into how the coatings could be of use for batteries. And so, as I read further and further, I became more and more motivated that this is the area of research that I would like to continue in my PhD. So, for that, I reached out to Professor Kim, another exceptional scientist at HKUST in Hong Kong. And I'm very happy that he accepted me for a PhD position. And that is the starting point where I started my battery research. And now I've moved to McGill as a postdoc, and I continue working on batteries. And yeah, I think it will continue a long time. Yep.
What do you think about the European Union policy over fossil fuels? They formally banned sales on new fossil cars from 2035. I think US have also similar upcoming bans, like they are totally moving to the electric vehicles. So, what's your
Yeah. So yeah, this is kind of inevitable. We can see that the climate change is so aggressively targeting our world. We can see it from the harsher winters, longer winters, and also harsher and longer summers in some regions. So to combat this, we need to get rid of the fossil fuels, especially the carbons, right? So in this case, the European Union has a very aggressive policy where they want to remove uh, petrol and diesel-driven electric vehicles, especially the cars, off the road by 2035. In some cases, especially the Nordic countries, want to do it even faster by 2030 in some cases. So yes, this is a very good step that they are taking, but we also need to have a more circular economy for the batteries itself, because simply replacing the existing petrol and diesel driven cars by battery driven cars, or EVs as we call them, is not going to be sufficient. For example, right now, one out of 250 cars roughly are EVs. And if you look at globally, the saturation of these EVs is mainly just in three regions, let's call them, with mainland China at first place, then the EU and the US. But if you look at the per capita EVs, then EU is at first place, especially the Nordic countries are far ahead of other countries. And then it is followed by the US and China. And the other important thing that is related to the EU regulations is that they want to make the battery economy to be a circular economy. What that means is that the batteries need to be recycled much better. And this will start at the consumer point and by better labeling, such as newer batteries are going to start supporting QR codes. which will tell you what is the composition of the battery, where it came from, what material does it have. Because if you eventually want to recycle the batteries, it is necessary for the eventual recycler, right? The companies that want to recycle it to know the exact composition, right? Because then they can sort and divide and separate different kinds of batteries with different compositions. So that could make the processes that they need to do to recycle much more efficient. So as the legislations go, of course, it is a really good step that the EU has taken. And of course, I believe the US and the China and rest of the developing world will follow suit and have similar regulations in the upcoming years. Yes.
Okay, okay. So how much does this project be eco-friendly? Burning fossil fuel emits smoke, and what do these battery could harm our Earth?
This is a very important question that everyone in the general population wants to know. That I'll go and buy an electric vehicle. Is it really good for uh, the global environment? So the answer is a little bit complicated. If we just take the initial stage of uh, the of the car assembly, right? At that point, of course, because the new electric vehicles have the batteries and already a lot of processing energy from the power stations. Some of them even coal power has gone in. So at the beginning stage, if we compare, probably the electric vehicles will come out to be less eco-friendly. But however, it's very important to realize that over the lifespan of an electric vehicle, it is going to emit far less uh, uh, carbon dioxide and other related pollutants. And over the life cycle of the electric vehicle, it is going to be much more eco-friendly. And we also need to keep in mind that uh, the batteries are not only simply related to the electric vehicles, there are many different kinds of batteries. And currently, the most popular one is the lithium-ion batteries, which dominates everything from portable electronics to our mobile phones and EVs. But there are going to be more and more alternatives. Some of them are, of course, going to be cheaper, such as the sodium-ion battery, which was very recently initiated and commercialized by mainland China. Then we have the redox flow batteries, and we need to think of rechargeable batteries as a whole system, right? Which is going to be integral if we want to also have renewable energies from solar or wind, because you have to store the energies, right? So these rechargeable batteries are going to be integral for that as well. And so another thing that is important to keep in mind, especially when it comes to the slightly larger scale electric vehicle batteries, is that in a car, for example, when the battery capacity will fall to around 80%, it might no longer be very suitable to be used inside the electric vehicle as it is, right? Because the driving range could fall quite a bit, but it doesn't necessarily have to be end of that battery, right? So, for example, if an EV battery, which is to 80% of its capacity, it can be repurposed to store the energy from, like I said, the solar or wind generation. And in that case, MIT did some research that it can actually be used for energy storage for up to a decade, right? So if we can have a more synergistic approach where the batteries can, their life cycles can be extended, so we can see that the whole process, as the industry and the structures related to the rechargeable batteries will grow, it will become more and more eco-friendly. Yes.
Mhm. So there are several reasons why US and EU are switching to electrical cars instead of fossil fuels. They say due to environmental concerns, some government policy, technological advancement, some consumer demands, or maybe energy security. So what do you think about it?
I think to a large extent, it is a valid reason. Every country, especially the ones that are developed, want to be energy secure, right? And for example, in the recent events in Russia, Ukraine, we saw that uh, how these dependencies can be very dramatically affected, right? Especially for EU, it was a huge concern. And this is also the reason that EU is so forceful in pushing through legislation so they can become more energy independent, right? And in this case, of course, they will, for the foreseeable future, continue to depend to a certain extent on oil, gas, and related fossil fuels. But in the long term, of course, they want to move as quickly as possible towards renewable energy sources. Like in even in the last year, 2022, the energy that they derived from rechargeable sources grew appreciably to a large extent, where I think roughly about 20% of the EU energy needs were actually supplied by renewable energy. So, of course, it remains a valid concern that these very large economies, especially EU, US, mainland China, they want to be as energy independent as they can. Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, it seems true. But what do you think, like, especially the production part, since you can see, of course, you can avoid, like, the EU and West then can avoid the fossil fuel dependency. But the thing is, they're gonna depend on lithium sources in terms of production of batteries, which is another challenging. You can say they are moving from one block to another. For instance, lithium, the main producers are Australia, Chile, and China. And yeah, so what do you think? How does it actually minimize the fossil fuel dependency?
A very complex question. Batteries by themselves are a complex technology, and it is very difficult that a single country can have all the resources available to from raw material extraction to the final stage of production of a battery, that it can have the raw materials, the technology as well in place, the infrastructure is in place to do this, of course. So in one way, these developing countries will move from one dependency to maybe another one. But in their mind, of course, it is that maybe the new dependencies will be more favorable for them, right? These countries might have better relationship with such as Australia and maybe Chile and other places where lithium is extracted. So that could be one consideration. But of course, the other one is that now the industry is mobilized. It's going to get a lot of funding and a lot of money is going to be devoted to developing this technology. So it is a natural procession of things in a way also. And of course, there are concerns that with such an increase in lithium battery productions, especially that the lithium resources will become constrained, and it will be possible that then favoritism or people who have access to those lithium resources will monopolize the distribution and the production of lithium-ion batteries. Yes, of course, this remains a concern, and this is why like recycling of the batteries and more moving to a technology such as sodium-ion batteries is going to be much more important, right? The next stage of the lithium-ion batteries has to be that we move towards raw materials that are more equitably distributed throughout the world. Therefore, that the not only the developed few countries or regions, as well as the developing and the underdeveloped countries can become a part of a more homogeneous energy policy, right? That everyone can adopt and everyone can benefit from. Yes.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I believe like most of this work is to avoid outflowing of money into Arabs and Gulf countries and also the Russia dependency. But now, yeah, you are also agree like USA, you will still gonna depend on China and Australia. But the another concern is like recently in Iran, their geologist has discovered around 8.5 million tons of lithium in their western side. So you can say, so previously they have a huge fuel production, but now in terms of lithium, they have around huge resources. So what do you say on that?
Yes, of course. As the industry will grow, more and more investment will go into finding lithium resources. And of course, if Iran has found a lot of lithium resources, it will be beneficial for them. And I think Iran has fairly decent relationships with mainland China, for example. So in case this could be something that they could explore. And at the same time, for the Arab countries and the other ones, they have the money from their existing oil resources. And it's not like the fossil fuel dependency is going to go away so quickly. So this is also an opportunity for these countries to invest into the infrastructure development, right? Like I said, the battery is not only the EV batteries, right? We have to move actually for the production of the lithium ion batteries, we need the grid system and the energy generation plants, they have to become environmentally friendly. And Middle East and other countries in this region have so much resources from solar as well as wind that if they would develop that, right, they could by themselves also develop an energy ecosystem that might not directly depend on lithium and stuff, but at the same time, they will be producing a lot of green energy, right? And with their existing oil and other fundings and the money they have available, they can develop a really good and robust system where they could also be a part of this global change while we move towards more energy efficient and more environmentally friendly technologies for energy generation and storage.
Okay. So, in 2019, Elon Musk said like battery replacement module that gonna cost between 5K US dollar to 7K, and each Tesla use 4 to 5 battery module per vehicles, meaning that like you must have around 20 to 35K for the replacement. And even in Hong Kong, yeah, there was a case like, and the people shocked when the Tesla company, gave them a receipt of around 171 K Hong Kong dollar to replace the batteries after the checkup. So afterwards, like they reduced the price to 91K Hong Kong dollar. But I think like the replacement is still challenging. So what's your take on?
So of course, we have to understand that we are at the very beginning, the very initial stage of electric vehicles, right? So the regulation has to come from the countries, right? Once there is more robust consumer protective policies in place, especially driven by EU, US, and the mainland, so then the consumer will be much better protected, right? Uh, the the entire process will become more uniform. The consumer will be much better informed from the beginning. This goes back to what I was talking about, that the EU has a policy of better labeling and better information being provided to the consumer, that what is actually inside the EV packs that they are using inside uh, their uh, their cars. So yes, of course, outlying cases like this can always happen. I do not know exactly what this case was that you mentioned in Hong Kong, but of course, I think all of this will come back to that once there is strong enough legislation in place that consumer can be protected, then of course it will become much more easier for the consumer. And secondly, as I mentioned before, that once the rechargeable batteries become more and more part of our everyday life, which means that they become part of our perhaps charging stations that we could have at home, or they become part of the grid systems that we could have in our locality, then maybe just directly replacing the battery to a new one doesn't need to be always necessary. The first battery could have a second life for a second uh, technology, which might not have the same amount of critical dependence of, let's say, on the charging rate or the state of life or state of health of the battery. So, of course, with more and more uh, development in the field, these cases should become more and more easier to resolve. And of course, the batteries will continue to become cheaper as the time goes on, as the economy of scale comes into play.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so another, I think on the consumer side, another concern while adopting totally towards the battery vehicles, electric vehicles, is that like the charging time, right? And the traveling time based on the single charge. So what do you think? How long it will take so that user can easily charge their cars, like compared to the fossil fuel refilling? The thing is, like I saw a research like on the Realme GT3, they introduced a charger which can charge up their cell phone within 9 minutes fully 100%. So what do you think, like how much it will take so that the user could get kind of instant charging or maybe very fast charging, and so that, and also of course the traveling range.
The consumer point of view, this is really important, right? So again, we have to just take a small step back. We are at the very beginning of electric vehicles. And if you just look at over the last 15 years or so, that the charging rate of the cars by themselves have also improved tremendously, right? There are there are like three levels of battery charges. The oldest one being the level one, which used to take like 20, 30 hours to charge. And just for example, if you use a level one charger for 1 hour, you get roughly around 6 to 8 kilometers of charging done. But then we moved on to level two chargers, which have become more common, which will give you in 1 hour of charging maybe 120, 130 kilometers of range. But then you move on to the state of the art superchargers or level three chargers, which, for example, Tesla uses. And in their case, you can charge like for 15 minutes on these superchargers and get a driving range that is around 320 kilometers, which is a tremendous increase if you just look at this progression. Yes, of course, the Tesla charging stations are few as compared to the fact that charging at home is still much slower. But we need to keep in mind that the technology will become more and more accessible over time, and the charging times will continue to decrease. Of course, the ideal would be that we could match what we have for the gasoline cars, right? That I go to a fueling station and get my car topped up in 5 minutes, right? That would be the ideal. But again, as the industry will grow, as more and more electric vehicles will come onto the roads, it will become more and more feasible for industries and people who want to invest into building these charging stations to provide better and better facilities to the consumer, right? It will become industrially viable to do it, right? It will go hand in hand as the adoption of EVs will improve, the costs will go down, and the charging times will continue to improve. Yeah, but to give a specific time frame when this might become equivalent to charging your car at a gasoline station, it is difficult, but we can hope that it should be not too far away.
Okay. Yeah, I think the easiest part is to build some charging station where user can easily replace the batteries. In terms of some stack, just there are legitimate safety concern associated with the batteries for electric cars, particularly when it comes to overheating and fire risk. Okay, so what's okay? So tell me about your current research and current challenges in terms of batteries, and yeah, what do you see? How you're gonna improve it further?
Yes, definitely. But it the industry, sorry, the industry will always look at the feasibility because industry wants to earn money, right? So as more and more people will begin to adopt electric vehicles, the charging station will also start to pop up, right? We have only like in the US, you have like I think I do not remember the exact number of supercharging station that Tesla has, but with more and more countries uh, adopting electric vehicles, the technology will start to pass on, right? So the rate of charging, as we've seen for like the laptops and the mobile phones, right? Because everyone is using a phone today. So there is a real need to do that. So industry can put the resources into the research and development, and of course, better and better materials and charging frameworks can be found to do that. And of course, we need to consider that when you charge a battery very fast, it generates heat and you need a cooling solution for that. So inside our phones, the cooling systems have also improved. The circuitry to control the charging processes have also improved. In the battery pack, there are a large number of cells connected, right? So to cool them down simultaneously is a little bit more challenging. But of course, once more people will adopt electric vehicles, more R&D and more resources can be dedicated to finding better cooling systems, better circuitry to make the process fast charging and to keep this level of safety to be very high, right? That is also very important when we talk about the batteries. That the safety aspect cannot be neglected. You can charge your battery very fast, but the risk of some kind of damage to the battery in the extreme case that there is a fire or an explosion also goes up, right? So it is not simply that I cannot charge my battery faster. It is that there has to be a balance between how fast you want the consumer to be able to charge while keeping all the safety concerns in check. So that is also very important. But as we move to more safer batteries, better chemistries of batteries, it will become much more easily available. And yeah, okay. So the challenges for batteries, there are a lot of challenges for batteries because it's again, it's a very new technology. It's a complex technology that needs to be still vastly improved, right? So to let's start with what I do in my uh, PhD research. We were focused on moving away from lithium towards sodium. Sodium is much more abundant in the Earth crust, right? It is present everywhere. So if we could uh, build a technology where the lithium-ion batteries could be replaced by sodium-based batteries, right? The price for the batteries would come down, and it should be more readily available to all kinds of regions, not only the developed countries, but as well as the developing and the underdeveloped countries could take use of it. So my PhD research was mainly focused on the anode part, which is one electrode, and was based on the sodium metal batteries. So one way to improve the energy density, which is how much work your battery can do, right, would be to replace the lithium ion battery chemistry with a metal based chemistry. So, without getting too technical, the idea is to replace the current graphite anode with a foil of metal, which can be lithium, or in our case, it was sodium. But when we do that, there are many extra challenges that need to be dealt with, primarily from the safety concerns that are associated with using a metal foil inside the battery. So my work was dedicated to stabilizing the metallic anode and to especially study the chemistry that formed in the very thin layer that forms on the metallic anode that actually makes our batteries work. So that was the focus of my research during the PhD. And for my postdoctoral at McGill, uh, now I'm working with the other electrode, which is the cathode part, right? So the other way is to have new cathode materials which can have a working range at a higher voltage, which can give you again more energy. So again, once you go to higher voltages, there are many challenges that are related to the electrode becoming unstable due to large volume changes or additional reactions which can occur with the electrolyte, which enables the transfer of the ions inside the battery. So for my current research, on the cathode side, we are again working with coatings. As I said, like my interest was in coatings. So we would like to stabilize the interface between the cathode materials, high voltage cathode uh, oxides with the electrolyte, as well as work on more environmentally friendly binders that we could include, which is uh, like the glue which holds together the cathode particles. So this is my current research. As for the challenges, yes, of course, the challenges exist for all components inside the battery. It is on the anode side, I said we would like to replace the graphite, and the industry is trying to replace the graphite with silicon-based anodes. And as I mentioned previously, that there are commercial efforts to develop sodium-ion batteries, some of which we should start to see in this year and especially next year. Some of them we even might start to see them get started into electric vehicles, right? So that will be interesting to see. And in the electrolyte, we have a liquid electrolyte. So when, for example, we had the cases of such as Samsung phones catching fire, it is essentially the electrolyte is catching the fire, right? So if we could replace these flammable liquid electrolytes with solid electrolytes, they will become much safer, right? So, for example, Japan is investing a lot in the development of solid state batteries because if we look back, Japan is where the rechargeable batteries started with Sony commercializing them in 91, right? But now they have fallen behind a little bit because other countries, such as mainland China, Korea, US, have taken the lead in the battery development. So they want to catch up. And the area, for example, they are focusing on is to actually replace the liquid electrolyte with a much safer solid electrolyte. So for the electrolyte, we have such kind of solutions. Of course, many challenges still exist. This is why it's not commercialized yet. And on the cathode side, like for example, I mentioned that we are working with higher voltage cathodes. There is, of course, an ideal scenario where we could replace these cathodes because they depend on uh, many metals, which are again concern not only from pollution but also because of their high cost or how they are extracted. For example, cobalt is quite expensive. It is also toxic, and there is a problem that around 70% of the cobalt that is used is taken from DR Congo, right? So over there, a lot of this cobalt is being extracted and through child labor practices, which we do not want to see, right? So these have to be gotten rid of. And also, like we talked about dependencies, if 70% of the cobalt is coming from DR Congo, if the political situation over there would change, it would have global implications. So we can see that such kind of dependencies we need to get rid of, right? So there is an effort that is going on to move towards more sustainable materials inside the batteries, like getting rid of the more expensive materials like cobalt and replacing them with manganese and stuff. So there is another cathode material which is undergoing a lot of academic as well as industrial research, and that is the sulfur. Sulfur is abundantly available. It is not toxic. It can be combined with almost all the other battery chemistries. But of course, there are many challenges. It also would give you a very high energy density. So, if, for example, imagine a scenario. So, when we were working on, as I said, on my PhD, we were working with sodium. So, if you want to replace the graphite with a cheaper alternative, that is the sodium, you would also like to have something cheaper and more feasible on the cathode side, and that is the sulfur, right? So, if you could have batteries such as the sodium sulfur battery, right, with a very safe chemistry and good charging rates, then we can really bring down the cost of the batteries and make them readily available. Because with huge storage of both sodium and sulfur being present, we can move from the EVs, we can move to the grid state, right? And that is when we will start to see the real role of uh, rechargeable storage as well as rechargeable energy sources and their implication towards moving to minimizing the effects of climate change. Yeah, so I went into perhaps too much detail, but
That's great. Wish you best of luck, and thanks for enlightening a lot of concern over the batteries with us.
thank you for being here.
For the user side, hope you enjoyed this show, and see you soon. Bye.